is it? Sorry, y'all.
These are the normal funds of...
Yes, the funds of virtual learning.
Yeah.
Okay, we should be good. Hopefully everyone is seeing my screen. All right, so hi everyone. Thank you so much for being here today and joining the call with us. My name is Sarah Felder and I work for the Center for Ethical Leadership. I'm their program coordinator. So I work on just really offering leadership opportunities to anyone who is interested on campus. So we do things like this with the Leadership Development Series. We also run the Lead Orange campaign and Lead Orange Awards, which you'll see us highlighting students on social media. Our office really is just here to offer leadership coaching and different scholarships and different enrichment activities in any way we can for anyone who's interested in personal or professional development. We also have other people from our office on the call today. I believe Miguel Soto is on here, Andrew McGee, and then we also have Josh Taylor, who will be presenting with me today. So if you want to introduce yourself, Josh.
Sure. I think Taylor's on here too. So Taylor, thank you for all your work behind the scenes.
Yep, she's literally in my office sitting behind me. So
behind the scenes,
sorry,
that's great.
yeah, I forgot her. And Taylor.
Yes. So my name is Josh Taylor, and my work in the Center for Ethical Leadership is to, again, provide leadership development opportunities for students and staff across campus, students, faculty, and staff across campus. It is good to see some familiar faces. I see some of our PLC students and McKnight Scholars are in the group as well. So you guys get to hear me quite a bit. So sorry that you'll get to hear me more today, but hopefully it'll be something new that we're not covering in class. So this is, I think as a university, it's one of the things that we do really well is that we invest in leaders and we make sure that our students have as many leadership opportunities as possible. So it's exciting to be a part of that work. Okay, so today we're going to be looking at socially just leadership. And since our theme for the year is storytelling, we're going to be looking at how we can use stories to create or to be more effective socially just leaders. And so Sarah, I think you have a few comments about kind of the leadership development series, and then we can jump into today's topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a few benefits of attending this leadership development series. If you attend at least 4 of our seminars, you will receive an invitation to the Lead Orange Awards in the spring. Whether that will be in person or virtual, we are not sure yet in this COVID world and times, but we'll have something. So yeah, if you attend 4 of these, you hop on these virtual calls with us, then you will get an invitation to the awards ceremony, and then you'll also be awarded with a certificate saying that you completed these seminars. If you attend at least 5, then you will also receive a medal in leadership that you can wear at graduation, in addition to being invited to the Lead Orange Awards, as well as getting that certificate. Are there any questions on that? Okay. All right, so for those of you that were maybe not on the call with us last month, we talked about the power of having your own narrative in leadership and just the power of telling your own story. And the reason that we picked this theme for the year is because stories are so powerful. If you think about it, we as human beings have been telling stories since the beginning of time around campfires, cave drawings. We tell stories around the dinner table. It really is, as this first bullet point says, we just use them to make sense of our experiences and ourselves. Stories also connect us. So through storytelling, we create values, bonds, and a group identity. And stories help shape the culture we want to create as a leader. So we talked a little bit about this, that, to shape a culture, to really become influential in the type of leader that you want to be, first you have to actually be able to listen and hear other people's stories. And the more that you listen and you kind of soak up knowledge from others, the more interesting your platform will be, the more interesting your stories will be. And from that, you building your own story by having experiences with others, you're going to be able to motivate people to join you, to engage with you, invest in your ideas, your brands, your merchandise, really whatever it may be. This idea of a narrative in your leadership really just kind of explores all bounds. It doesn't just relate to a certain type of work or a certain type of major. Leadership really is incorporated in everything that we do, especially when we're able to powerfully tell our own narrative as well as make room for other people's narratives. And with socially just leadership, we're really today going to be talking about, making that space to hear other people's narratives.
Yeah. So, how can storytelling create social justice or create opportunities for greater social justice? So, I think it's important for all of us to start seeing our lives as story, as narrative. Narrative, again, like Sarah said, is a way that we connect with people. It's a way that we really make sense of our lives, express connection to others. And so it's important for us to recognize the power of story. So also important for us then to start to see our lives as a story, but also to see our lives as connected to a greater story. And so if we were looking at maybe like the arc of social justice inside of the United States, then we can see that maybe our stories connect to this larger storyline as well. And so that's one of the ways that we want to start to view this, so that we can use story as a part of our social justice leadership skills. I think it's also important that we recognize that people are moved by stories. People change their ideas and opinions because of stories, that people remember stories, they're drawn to stories. For any of you who find yourself with the opportunity to speak in public or to speak on Zoom, I would highly recommend capturing the power of narrative in your presentation. Stories are absolutely a way in which we communicate major themes, ideas, values, more than some of like the propositions that we would state in speaking. People remember our stories. So it's important to tell and hear others' stories as a way of experiencing or communicating our needs or our thoughts or ideas for greater social justice. So if we go on to the next slide, it's a seat at the table. So we are going to kind of frame this conversation, our discussion today, on this idea of having a seat at the table. And so it's probably important that we understand that when we're talking about having a seat at the table, this is a metaphorical understanding. So we are talking about a table as a place where decisions are made. So we want to have a broad range of perspectives that have influence over the decisions that are being made. So it's important that we want to create a seat at the table for diverse opinions, ideas, backgrounds, to make sure that we are inclusive as leaders, that we are we're giving people representation for social justice. There are a broad range of perspectives that we want to include, and we'll talk a little bit about this. It's impossible to have a seat at the table for every intersectional type of individual that we would represent in leadership, but it's just important to make sure that we do have differing opinions or different backgrounds represented whenever we are making decisions or we're on a leadership team. Okay, then yes, this next slide. In leadership, our voices do carry weight. And this is why it's so important that we make sure that we do have a seat at the table for everyone. We're about to show you a few pictures of leadership groups And we'll pause just for a second when you see the first picture to see if there are any voices that you might feel like are missing. You can definitely put something in the chat if you see the picture and you feel like you recognize some voices that might be missing. So let's go ahead and show you this first picture here. Now, the really cool thing is that someone did the hard work for us. So as you might be typing in the chat of some voices that might be missing from that table, and this one actually is pretty literally a table, but the internet has done some great work for us to already highlight maybe some of those issues. And so Taylor, can you show us what this next picture, or sorry, whoever's running the PowerPoint, can you show us what this next picture is? Okay, so right here we can see that these are the only two women who are at that table. Sarah, I think you can tell us a little bit more about the social media phenomena that was going on where we found these pictures.
Yeah, absolutely. So this, kind of became a trend, especially right now with the political climate we're in and just everything that's going on in our country and in the United States. This became a trend, I'd say maybe a couple months ago. And it was just LUK released it. And it was just an article showing what happens when men are removed from politics, what this actually looks like, what a very physical, visual representation looks like. So, if I go back one, oh, just kidding. If I go back one, not forward one, you can see that, when you look at this kind of just with a blind eye, you don't see the representation that is missing until it's kind of very blatantly pointed out to you that this whole table is now empty, minus two women.
So I think we have another one next, and this one has the lovely queen in it, I believe.
Yes. So again, we see a picture that is just full to the brim with people, right? I mean, we've got 4 rows of, very influential, very political people. And it honestly, what I will give credit for in this photo is we do have a lot of diversity and we do have a lot of representation. But again, if we are focusing on removing men from the picture, here we have 3 women left, and we have, again, the lovely queen, sitting so politely in the front. But it's really just kind of fascinating when you look at the difference between this. And again, like I said, you don't really notice anything being wrong until you see how empty it truly is when we remove kind of the majority and the majority voice or the majority story out of the picture. So just a little, brief story about, women in the workplace. I am a woman in the workplace. And Josh and I were actually having a conversation, and he asked me, he said, Sarah, when you think about leadership or you think about yourself in the next, 5 or 10 years, where do you want to be as far as leadership goes? And I honestly did not have an answer for him. And I was really kind of shocked by the question, just because, to be perfectly honest with you guys, as a woman in the workplace, I have never been asked that before. I have never been asked where I see myself in leadership, where I see myself, climbing the ladder. And so I had to really kind of realize that Josh was allowing me to have a seat at the table. He was welcoming my narrative, and he was welcoming my story. And, I started to really look at my leadership, not in a place of, okay, where do I want to be at in position wise? We all would love to make a ton of money and be CEOs, but what do I want out of leadership? And the conversation we had, I told Josh, I would love if someday the pitch of my voice didn't deter me from jobs. So I do kind of have a higher pitched voice, and I have been told in the past, that I will not succeed among other men because my voice is too high pitched compared to lower pitched voices in the room. I also am someone who loves humor. I'm a pretty sarcastic person. I also just like to make environments fun and welcoming and loving. And I like to lead with humor. I like to make jokes with people. And I've also been told that, as a woman, I shouldn't do that if I want to climb the ranks. I shouldn't lead with humor. I should more lead with like a stern voice, which if I were to have, an equal seat at the table, I would never change who I am to climb the ladder in leadership. I would love to be able to lead with humor and kindness and not have to change anything about the way that I treat people to move up. So honestly, this conversation between Josh and I just happened really seamlessly while we were building this presentation. So it doesn't have to be a super formalized conversation. It can really just be, allowing people to speak.
Sarah, can you, I think there might be some people in the waiting room. If you could,
Okay,
as we
yes.
go on to the next slide as well.
Uh,
So the next slide that we're going to talk about is on leadership responsibility. And Sarah, if you have to unshare your screen for a second to get people in, I understand. Just fine.
I think, oh, wait, no, I can click. Oh, we are all over the place right now. It's okay.
No
Admit
worries.
all.
So with leadership responsibility, especially when we're talking about representation, we might have the question of like, exactly why does that matter, or how do we go about that? And so I actually wanted to talk for a second. I know that not everyone on the call is a parent, but my guess is that everyone on the call has some type of framework from which to work from if we're talking about a parent-child relationship. So, or at least maybe we can imagine that. I have a couple stories here that I feel like are good stories, I guess, about representation and why it's a responsibility of leadership. So I think it's important, I said, a parent, to speak with your child and to actually give them a seat at the table as well. I think often we forget that kids are human beings too, that have complex thoughts and emotions and ideas. To give them representation for big decisions in the family is actually something that is important. So for 10 years of my career, I was a high school teacher. So I taught in Portland, Oregon, and in Guthrie, Oklahoma, and then in Stillwater, Oklahoma. Primarily I taught upper level, like 11th, 12th grade English, and then leadership courses. Well, my sons would frequently, I have two sons, and they would frequently come with me whenever I would go up to the school, maybe after hours to do some work or on the weekend to do some work. And a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to transition to higher education and to come to Oklahoma State for work. And so I actually was talking with my sons about this, and my youngest son, Luke, I was talking to him about this opportunity, and I said, hey, what do you think I should do? Like, do you think this is a good idea for me to go ahead and transition to the university? And then he said that he'd be really sad if I left the high school. And so I thought, okay, this is interesting. So why is it that would make you sad? And he said that he really loved running around the school building whenever it was empty. And we go up there after hours on the weekend, that he really loved that. Especially, he loved playing in this one really big room, which is like the school cafeteria, basically, but it was called the Student Center. And he really loved playing in there. And so he was going to miss that. Okay, so what I ended up doing then was I obviously took the job at Oklahoma State, but it changed the way that I transitioned out of the high school. So on one of my last days of school, I took Luke up to the school after hours. There wasn't anyone else in the building. And we had like a giant Nerf gun fight in the student center, just the two of us, because that's what he really was going to miss. And so I thought this would be a good way for us to have a last kind of experience. And then we made sure then early on at Oklahoma State that he felt really comfortable on campus. And so we actually would play a hide and go seek out on library lawn. We call it the maze, but it's like the flower garden just outside the student union on library lawn. And we actually still do that pretty frequently as a family. We'll go out there and play hide and go seek outside. So in that way of giving him representation, by giving him a seat at the table for a big family decision, maybe it didn't change the decision that I was going to make, but it changed the way in which I made the decision. It changed my actions. It changed the way that I transitioned from one place to another. And that's what representation does for us, is it gives us a different perspective so that we can, we can understand better how to lead. So there also been some times though where I haven't done that well. And I think I probably learned from some of my mistakes so that this last one was actually a very good experience. But I remember, so I used to teach in Portland, Oregon. And at this point, my oldest son was about 2.5. And so my wife and I had decided we're going to move from Portland, Oregon to Stillwater, Oklahoma, or back here. We had actually met here in college. And so we're going to move back here. And so the moving truck, we pull up the moving truck and we're starting to move everything into the truck, pack it up, because the next day we're going to be driving across the country. And we'd obviously talked to our 2.5-year-old about moving. But we hadn't actually asked the question and listened to any of his concerns or fears, because he was 2.5, and I felt like he'll be fine, everything will be great. But what we really hadn't talked about was the fact that we were about to be taking all of his toys and putting them on a truck, and then shutting the door to the truck to where he couldn't see his toys anymore. And so as that was happening, he just melts down and is screaming and yelling, and he just thought we were taking all of his toys and that they were now gone forever. Because I hadn't taken the time, or my wife and I hadn't taken the time to listen to him, to give him a seat at the table, to hear his voice, to understand his concerns. And so that was a time where we really got it wrong. And I think another maybe microcosm or a small experience that can say how important it is as leaders to be giving space or seat at the table for all of the people that we're leading, and the decisions that we make are absolutely affecting others. So let's go on to the next slide real fast. So it isn't always easy to give people a seat at the table. Please understand that we are not looking for quotas. I think that really undermines a lot of what we are asking for in leadership. Also, we're not looking for token representatives. We're not even asking that we are asking though that as a leader, you make space for others' stories. And really, it's important to make sure that you make space for stories that are dissimilar from your own. To make sure that you create space or a seat at the table for those who might have a different perspective, different ideas, maybe even contradictory ideas, but to be able to create space to share those stories, it will absolutely make you a better leader. Okay, the next slide, we're talking about being heard here. So socially just leadership, it demands that we create a seat at the table for these other stories. It's important that when we're leading that we recognize that our story is maybe not the only story. And I don't know if you're familiar with the theories of dominant narratives, but the idea of a dominant narrative is that there's, one dominant voice, and that if you don't fit into that narrative or into that story, then you're kind of steamrolled, or you're overlooked, or you're not heard. And so if we're going to be socially just leaders, we have to make sure that it's not just the dominant narrative that we're hearing, but that we are listening to a wide variety of voices. When we're leading, we need to make sure that the people who are affected have a voice. And this is, again, crucial. If we're making leadership decisions, but we don't have representation from the people that are affected by it, then how do we really know that we're addressing things in a helpful way? Often, if we misunderstand a problem because maybe we haven't heard the right stories, or we haven't listened to the right people, then we can make things worse in our leadership, because again, we're not listening to those voices. And then this is very, very true. The higher up you get in leadership, especially if we're talking like a positional leadership approach, the decisions that you make end up affecting more and more people. And so it's important that we listen even more. So the higher up that we get in leadership, it's important that we listen more and that we talk less. Because again, what we say really does affect a lot of people, and there are a lot of decisions made based off of what we say. So crucial, again, to listen so well to others.
All right, so I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about the accordion effect and why social justice absolutely depends on socially just leadership. Okay, so some of you may be familiar with this model, especially if you come from the health field in any way, because this is where this is predominantly used, but I think it is just so relatable in every field. So we're talking about this kind of as an accordion effect. So if you see this very oddly shaped oval looking thing, picture it more of as an accordion, you know, the instrument that like goes open, close, open, close. It kind of makes a terrible noise if you don't know how to play, but just kind of picture that and, you know, with me. So what the social ecological model states is that from the bottom level, an individual, you know, a one single person can affect all the way up to public policy, but it also can go the other way. Public policy will affect all the way down to the individual. So let's look at it first, starting with the smallest circle, the individual. So this is your personal knowledge, your attitudes, your skills. You know, this may be things like your beliefs or your morals that you grew up with. It can also be the type of education that you have. It can be, you know, the things that you've inherited as far as knowledge from your parents, just your experiences, the community you grew up in, anything like that. You're just very, you know, your individualized knowledge, your attitudes, and your skills. Well, we are absolutely, you know, we are beings that affect each other, and we are very much like mutually learning and changing as we hang out with other people. So we're absolutely going to affect that next level. I know that I and my knowledge, my attitudes, all of that are going to affect my friends, my family, my social network. Anytime I share my opinion or my beliefs on something, or even, you know, the education that I've received, that is expanding further out into this interpersonal network. Then, of course, it's going to go up into that organizational level. Your family, your friends, your social network a lot of the time are where you go to school or where you work. And that's going to, again, be affected by the other two rings. Going further up, your work, your school are going to really kind of instill your cultural values, what you find normal, even the built environment that you live in. So what kind of neighborhood you live in, if your house has heating, if your house has, you know, proper ventilation, different things that can affect our overall well-being. And then, you know, all of these things lead up to public policy. An individual, a group of individuals get together to create public policy, which are the laws that affect every single one of us. And if you think about it, the laws and the regulations are going to go all the way back down the same way. So those things are going to affect cultural values, norms, you know, built environments. Are we going to help create affordable housing? Are we going to help create neighborhoods and homes that are safe to live in? Different things like that. And then that community is going to affect what kind of places you work in, what kind of schools your children go to, which again are going to go down and affect the friends that they have, the social network that they build, which is going to instill different knowledge, attitudes, and skills in people. So just remember that when you are leading and when you're telling your story or making space for other people to tell your story, that this accordion effect is constantly happening and is constantly changing and adapting. And just remember that you as one individual person can make such a ripple effect. The same way that public policy can make such a ripple effect down to a single individual's life.
Sorry, it took me a while to unmute. I apologize.
You're fine.
So, important note here, when we're talking about collecting or creating space for stories, and especially stories from different populations, from representation, please understand that one story does not equate to the story from that entire population. So we don't want to tokenize a story and say that because this is one person's experience, now that is everyone's experience that is in that population. So in the next slide, it talks about how there are some dangers there's some dangers in narratives or in stories. Because stories are so powerful, we can kind of highlight or center a story that maybe isn't the most representative of a population. And so this is what we mean by don't tokenize stories and people. I think what this means is that one person's story, it does not equate to the story from the entire group. No group is a monolith, meaning that people think differently inside of every population, every group. So it's not like there is one standard position for all people of a specific population. I think this is a challenge that we have with underrepresented populations, is that we have one story from the underrepresented population, and now we believe that that population is a monolith, and then all people who are inside that population, who identify in that way, we now make an assumption that all people are now like that. But just think about other groups that you associate with, you that you identify with, whether that is your like male, female, transgender, whether that is through a religious group, or whether that's through a skin color. Inside of a group where you identify, you know very clearly that there are differentiations inside of that group, that not everyone in that group feels the same way. And so it's important that every story matters, but that every story doesn't generalize to every person in that population or in that group. For example, during the chattel slavery period or era in US history, there were a lot of stories that circulated about the happy slaves, or I think is what we call now the happy slave theory. And the stories would circulate about the slaves who liked being slaves. And those narratives were used as a justification for chattel slavery. Well, we look back on that now and know those stories were either coerced, they were taken out of context, or not transferable to the group as a whole. And so we can look back and say, oh, those were dangerous narratives because they centered that one voice and used it to justify an era that was really full of atrocities and immeasurable damage that was caused to people, to humanity throughout our world. And so it's important to recognize, yes, every story matters, but we don't want to then conclude that every story is generalizable to the entire population.
Yeah, so a personal experience I have with dangerous narratives is my older brother has Down syndrome, and I feel like dangerous narratives come up quite frequently, especially with tokenizing within the disabled population. So I can't tell you how many times when I say, oh yeah, my older brother has Down syndrome, people say, oh my gosh, they're just the cutest, they're the sweetest, they're always happy, they're just like big teddy bears. And if that's come out of your mouth before, that's okay. These are always learning moments. But that takes away from the fact that, you know, my brother has complex emotions. And even though he is a happy-go-lucky guy, I think that comes a lot from just the way my family instilled values in us. We're all just kind of goofballs, and it's the way that we were raised. But, you know, a lot of the time in school, my brother's name is Jordan, when he was having a bad day, no one ever really looked at him as, okay, you know, maybe he's going through something. Maybe he doesn't feel well. You know, did someone say something to him that affected him? Instead, he got just written off a lot because, well, you know, all kids with Down syndrome are just happy-go-lucky and just so cuddly all the time. And so we see that happen a lot, unfortunately, with Jordan. Another issue that happens in this population is, if you didn't know, in the United States, it is actually legal to pay people with disabilities at sweatshop labor fees. So for example, Goodwill hires a lot of individuals with disabilities, and they pay them around 27 cents an hour, which is nowhere close to minimum wage. And this all happened because one individual family said, oh, you know, my son is just happy to, you know, get out of the house and have the work, you know, we don't really care about pay. So that tokenized story and that dangerous narrative still lasts today. The people who work at Goodwill, if they are diagnosed with a disability, are working for around 20 cents an hour. I will tell you right now, my brother likes money and would hate to work for about 20 cents an hour. So just be careful of these kind of dangerous narratives when you tokenize someone across the board as being the story for the entire population. All right. So, what we want to do to not have dangerous narratives is we want to center voices. And what exactly does that mean? It really is, very simply put, just making spaces to hear the voice that feels oppressed. Josh has a great example with this, but one that I have is, how often have you been in a fight with maybe your significant other and you think you are 100% right? You have done absolutely nothing wrong. I will admit that I do that, but I have to center my husband's voice sometimes, and I have to hear his side of the story because I would like to remain married. And so I'm never going to come out with a healthy resolution for the type of marriage I want if I only center my voice and my opinion when we have disagreements. And then Josh has a story about his sister.
Yeah, so my sister is a Jewish studies professor, and so she is not Jewish, but she is a scholar of Judaism and has actually spent a good amount of time in Israel, studying and developing as a scholar there. But as a Jewish studies professor, she always feels like it's really important that students hear from Jewish religious leaders. So she'll bring rabbis into her classes to speak, so that Jewish leaders can properly represent their perspective and their ideas to the class. And so that's something that she feels like is very important. So that's what we mean by centering voices. And this is an important thing as a leader. We started off by saying that socially just leadership, so much of it is about creating space at the table. So if you are a leader and you have influence, you're already sitting at the table, then socially just leaders are the ones who pull up seats for others too, for others who aren't represented, for others who are affected by the decisions that are about to be made, but maybe don't have a voice at that table at the moment. And so that's our encouragement, is what can we all be doing in the spaces where we have influence to then pull up a seat at the table to where those who are not represented can also speak. So these are some places or some social justice, I would say, issues that are currently out there. This list by no means is exhaustive. Okay. We know that there is a genocide going on in China. I don't believe that is on our list. So this is not exhaustive at all. But these are places where we have seen students, faculty, and staff engaging action on campus, or maybe extending beyond our campus. But these are some of the big social justice issues that, like I said, we've seen. So racial justice, trying to find equity and equality, diversity, equity, and inclusion for all people, all races. Immigration policy is obviously something that has been a huge part of our country. And I know that we've had students who have done internships at the border trying to understand even more about how to move forward there. Access to healthcare, voting rights, disability rights, and that's something that maybe is, again, overlooked a lot, but having ability status, that this is a social justice issue. And so making sure that, our campus is, ADA compliant. And so those are important issues as well. LGBTQ plus community, making sure that there's diversity, equity, and inclusion in that community as well. And then it jumps up for hunger and then food security. So this is one of those issues where I would say that there's it's impossible to get universal agreement on anything, but there's near universal agreement, especially across our campus. We don't want students to be hungry. We don't want our faculty or staff to be hungry in our community. This is something that we really care about. And we believe that as a community, we can provide so that people in our community have resources for food. So hunger and food security is a great or a current social justice, I think, issue or some action that's been taken in Stillwater, which is great. Child advocacy, education, making sure that there's equal access to education, whether that be higher ed or maybe like equal funding for K-12 education. Financial freedom, affordable housing. Affordable housing is going to be a larger and larger role as well in this. And then fair compensation, whether that's access to higher paying jobs.
Yeah, and so we honestly just kind of wanted to put some of these up here for you to show that, social justice doesn't have to be polarizing. A lot of the time it's just something that we we invest in any of these different causes just because it is truly, what we see a need for. And so it doesn't have to be polarizing. It doesn't have to be a giant argument. These things are just happening all around us. And we also really encourage that, you start to look at where you can have socially just leadership in, these instances, but maybe also in other things that you're seeing around campus or in your community. Like Josh said, this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but we just kind of wanted to put some up to show you where socially just leadership can start to really make a movement and make a change.
Yeah, and then I know that when we're talking about these issues, they can be divisive issues. But it's really important for us to recognize that much of the time, we have similar goals, and that the disagreements, at least the good disagreements, they should be happening on how we accomplish those goals, how we get to the socially just place that we're journeying toward. But I would say that, again, much of the time, especially when you have genuine good dialogue and discussion, which I know is very difficult to have on Zoom, but in those good discussions, most people are agreeing on the end goals. Like I know that Yoko's on the call, and she's doing this incredible work with SEAT on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So much of the time, we have a similar goal or a shared goal or purpose that we want to see inclusion, that we want all people to feel like they belong regardless of their race, right? I mean, again, universal agreement is impossible, but near universal agreement, like we want people to be treated well, to be treated with inclusion and equality and equity. Like these are things that we all value, or that most of us value. The disagreement is, okay, so how do we get to that place? Well, those are good discussions to have. And that's the importance of good leadership there, is that recognizing we have similar aims, but we have to be very well, we have to be willing to have that discussion of, okay, so how is the best way to go about getting there? And maybe that's even the wrong question, because maybe there's not a best way to go about getting there, but there are multiple ways in which we can accomplish those goals. However, it's crucial. We all need a seat at the table if we're going to be able to discuss those issues. I think it's crucial to understand, like, if I'm a leader making decisions, I'm only going to be solving the problems that I know are problems. And I'm going to see the problems that come from my perspective. So if I'm not listening to others, if I don't have a table that's big enough for other voices, for diverse representation, there are entire issues that I'm just never going to know about. It's not that I'm necessarily intending to overlook, but just by my actions as a leader in not creating space for other stories, well, now I'm just not going to know about those problems and know how to solve them.
So at this time, I have to kind of say hello to all the future people that will be watching this in a recording. Also, we have to give a code word for every single presentation so that the people who watch it in the future can report the code word back to me and get credit for watching it. So the code word for today is green bean. Again, the code word is green bean.
Isn't this like on Dora the Explorer where they say like the code word for today?
Yeah, I do feel a lot like Dora, I'm not gonna lie, especially talking to a screen. Getting some very childhood flashbacks. But Josh, a question that I want to present to you, and then we're going to, open up the floor to other questions as well. But what I want to ask is how or what is your best advice to create a seat at the table? If we are really trying to share that socially just leadership means that we have diverse representation and we're not only talking to people who are like ourselves, or we're constantly circulating the same narrative. And we talked about that this is difficult to do. What is your best advice for bringing a chair to the table so that there's diverse representation?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. As I'm answering, please feel free to put other questions in the chat. Also, feel free to unmute and talk. That would be great as well. I know that in Zoom, that's always a challenge though, but again, feel free. We'd love to interact in the next few minutes that we have. I think that college is this incredible space or opportunity to make friends. And so I think a huge part of that is be intentional to make friends in spaces that aren't, I guess, like your normal space, like that you would naturally fit into. So join clubs, find other people that have different backgrounds, different stories, and then be intentional and listen. Ask those great questions to find out more about individuals and really listen to their stories. Whenever, and this is really hard, especially for leaders who have pretty strong ideas and opinions, especially when a person's story doesn't fit into your ideas and beliefs. Listen to those stories. Because it's really easy to, again, tokenize a story because it fits what you already think and believe. And so whenever you hear those stories that maybe contradict some of your own ideas or thoughts or beliefs, make sure we really listen there. Ask non-combative, just offensive questions to really understand more. I think those are great ways. But then if we're talking about like quite tangibly, like how to do this, it means that whenever you're asked for your opinions or you're asked for your ideas or suggestions, to make sure that you've heard from other people too.
Yeah, that's really great advice. I'm going to go ahead and start reading some questions from the chat box if that works. Okay. So, and also Josh can answer this, I can answer it, or anyone on the call, feel free to unmute and be like, I'm the expert on this. I know the answer because Josh and I aren't the experts on everything. And that's a part of leadership.
Absolutely. That'd be centering voices, right?
Yes. So the first question is, do you think it is appropriate to bring personal stories like this into answers to interview questions?
Do you have anyone on here from career services? Because this is right up your alley.
It doesn't seem like it. But I would
I'll
say,
have to make sure that Roberta is okay with my answer afterward. But yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
I was just going to say that, yes, I absolutely do. I think it's important the way that we formulate the answer and the way that we express our narrative.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like we have to make sure that it's an appropriate way of sharing the narrative. There are definitely some stories that would be oversharing, and that's not what we want to do in an interview necessarily. But yeah, I think that absolutely you can share stories. Actually, I was teaching my older son very recently. He had an interview for a club at the middle school, and we were going through like interview skills, and one of the big skills like to root everything in some type of experience or story that you can kind of like back up what you're saying. So if you're saying I'm a really collaborative leader in your interview, then yeah, having some stories to share are crucial.
Right. Yeah. How do you follow that up? If you're going to tell them that you're trustworthy or collaborative or whatever it may be, absolutely have experiences to follow that up. One of my biggest interview tips would be to say, don't even wait for them to ask for, well, how are you trustworthy? Just tell them how.
Yeah, yeah, and those stories again, that's how you're going to be remembered.
hmm The next question is, as someone who is a person of color, how do I help other people of color to the table and create that space to lead as a group?
It's really fascinating. And as a person who is not a person of color, um, I'd love for some other ideas or things like that to be shared here. I have some thoughts, but I would love to see if there's some other ideas. Kaylin, thank you so much for sharing us that question. It's a really fabulous question.
Well, I think one is, as a leader, you have an option, you have a choice to take on certain responsibilities. And I think as a person of color, and anyone who's marginalized or oppressed, that once you receive any type of privilege or opportunity, I think that then becomes your own responsibility to be intentional about bringing other people to the table. I really believe in that. That's something that I try to stand for. But it's all about having that response to the abilities that you have when you receive a certain amount of privilege or opportunity. Is to take on that responsibility and bring others with you.
Andrew, can I ask a follow-up question for you?
Yeah.
So specifically, like, how would you do that? So let's say that Kalen is leading a student organization. How can he use that opportunity for him as a leader to then create space for other people of color in leadership in that student organization?
I think advocating, first of all, to those who are in power, whether it's the leadership or executives or whoever you may be answering to, is to first be an advocate, to make sure that you are standing in the gap for those who need their voice heard. And I think recruitment also and engagement matters. Sometimes people of color or any marginalized group may not know what opportunities are available for them, and they don't know that they have an opportunity to have that seat at the table. So recruitment, I think, and going and searching for those who deserve that seat at the table is also necessary.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, just extending that offer, right?
Right.
Being able to say, I really think that this is a great opportunity for you to step into this space and to lead. Extending that offer to somebody is huge.
Yeah, and I think just overall inspiration is really important when you're extending that opportunity to someone. Really inspiring them to know that they have that seat and it is possible, and encouraging them to not be timid or afraid of having that seat. But inspiration is definitely important when it comes to that as well.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Let me open the chat. We have another one. Okay, it says many universities and businesses are now asking applicants to submit a diversity statement as part of their application packet. Be prepared to answer questions about diversity and inclusion in your interviews and learn about how to develop a strong diversity statement. Okay, so not a question, but a statement. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for
Well,
that.
that's really great. And I had heard that that was actually becoming more and more a part of like that process of the job, the interview processes. And if they aren't asking you a question, I'm pretty sure that we can at least expect, I'm sorry, if they're not asking for a statement, we can at least expect some type of question to be coming from employers so have you worked with a diverse group of people? Can you create a sense of inclusion in your groups? So those type of questions I think we'd absolutely be expecting. And again, please root those answers in stories that back up like, yes, I absolutely can.
You're welcome, and thank you to being here. Thank you for being here. Someone said thank you in the chat. So, are there any other questions, specifically about slides that we put up, or maybe even just very off-topic questions? Really, this is absolutely a safe space, and you can 100% unmute or again type in the chat box and I'll read it. We just want to hear from you, and I know that this isn't a topic that so much we can wrap our head around and be perfect at after hearing 1 hour long seminar, but we want to encourage you to start looking into this kind of leadership.
I have a question. Maybe Josh or you can help. My question is, how do you get your leadership? You guys mentioned a lot of things have to start with leadership. That's it. And so, to be able to affect and make everybody feel like they have a seat at the table, feel included. If you have leadership who does not see value in diversity, wants inclusivity, but does not see value in diversity, that's it. How would you go about trying to get them to understand that or to work with them in those efforts? I definitely try to have relationship so that I can share my own experiences and students' experiences mainly to try to get that across. But what advice would you, either of you have?
And it is Yoko, correct?
It is, yes, thank you.
We were in a meeting together last week with the student affairs. So it's great to see you again. Yoko, I thank you for that great setup. I really believe that this all comes back to this, the power of narrative. So yes, absolutely. I think the relationship is what matters, like having that relationship with leadership. But I think what can convince people that diversity really does matter and that we need to have a greater value for that is through narrative. Like if we can continue to tell the correct stories and really share those stories with leadership, that can be the motivating tool. Whether that, and again, you have to know your leadership to know what's going to motivate them. But if you know that, okay, what we really need is a bottom line, that's what can motivate leadership. Well, we know that diversity does help the bottom line. Because what you're doing is you're expanding your pool of talent exponentially. And so like we know that if we're a more diverse group, we're going to have access to more and more abilities. And so that's, I think, something that maybe we could tell those stories to leadership. I also think that if it's maybe something that's going to motivate them is more on a fear of or like a failure, and then we have to correct those failures. Well, we know that environments that aren't inclusive, or they're not welcoming, and people don't feel belonging, and people don't perform as well. And so we can share those stories of where students or people or employees have left, they haven't been retained, or they've not performed well and dropped out or failed as a lack of diversity and inclusion in our group. So I think, again, sharing the right story to really find like that motivation pool for the leadership. Yoko, I want to say that unfortunately that is absolutely happening. I would have thought that by this point in the arc of social justice in the country, we would be way past seeing the value, like whether or not there's value in diversity, and we would be far more on to, well, how do we need to do it? Because diversity is hard. It's way easier to just get a whole bunch of people who all think exactly the same and have the same experiences, and it's easier to do that in terms of just everyone getting along. But it's much harder to create that diverse environment. But we know that the end result is so much better. So again, I'm sorry that we're still having that fight, but hopefully we can get past that to really trying to discover what are the best ways to do this that really capitalize where everyone feels belonging and inclusion.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Josh.
Yeah,
And yes,
thank
I
you,
feel like,
Yoko.
we're making efforts, and I feel like we are making strides. I feel like getting the students to be, feel like give them a safe environment to share. That's something that I have been leading, is having them come and share lots of their conversations. And some of it is personal conversation, but some of it is them telling what they've seen their peers experience. And that has been helpful and informational and educational. And so I feel like that we are making strides in that area. But
I
thank
feel
you.
like,
Thank you
Yoko,
for
that's so
starting
much of, oh, absolutely. Yoko, I feel like that's so much of the work you're doing is you're creating space for stories. And just want to encourage you. I think that work is absolutely going to be very profitable, very successful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sarah, I feel like, oh, sorry, go ahead. Is that Jacob?
Yeah, that is.
Hey, Jacob.
I had a question concerning the social ecological model,
Yeah.
and mainly I've been introduced to it in a class before, and it makes the presumption that higher levels, things like public policy, have a greater impact than lower levels.
Mm-hmm.
And what I will say is, I've had to recruit for student organizations and the like, and what I've noticed is that the lower levels are much more effective. And I think sociology and a lot of the studies have shown that it's actually the level that has the greatest impact is the family and other fairly low levels. So my question is, what sort of studies have been done to confirm the validity of the socio-ecological model, and how sure are we that that is a proper way of applying it, especially considering some of the large-scale policy implications, like mask wearing, for instance, and the compliance issues that we are seeing with that.
Yeah, that's an amazing question, Jacob. And thank you so much for bringing that to the table for everybody. I feel like you and I could have this conversation in depth for hours and hours, because I absolutely agree with you about the social ecological model, which is always hard for me to say. Can't put those words together, apparently. But yes, I personally believe that, that interpersonal level, which includes, the family and the society that you're in and your social network, really does have one of the largest impacts. And in my previous career, I used to be a health and wellness coach, and I kind of started to adapt the socio-ecological model based on my experience with working with individuals with substance abuse and mental health. And so there are multiple studies by SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which I also can absolutely share with you via email or whatever works best, but showing that we very much are influenced by the people that are closest to us. And like I said, there is a lot of research in this that I am aware of as far as, mental health and substance abuse goes, that lower level of the socio-ecological model does affect greater than, even public policy. And so I kind of would say that, maybe I should have given a disclaimer that I adapt this a little bit more to what I've seen in the field. But yeah, especially with mask wearing, we absolutely have policies, from the CDC saying that everyone needs to wear them, yet, people's families or, their social network may disagree with that, even though we automatically assume that the public policy is that highest level. So hopefully that answered your question. Like I said, my experience with this, seeing the lower levels be more impactful, is mostly studies from SAMHSA, which I would be happy to share with you if you'd like to see them. I will say though that because my background is in health, I do apply a lot of that experience into the leadership world, but I have not so much seen this in leadership study, but more on the social justice front. Yeah.
And the other question I had was, why particularly is diversity valued, or not necessarily valued, but is the interest in a lot of the social justice areas in diversity in terms of immutable traits, race, gender, and the like? Why are you not considering, more of the diversity of opinion and more of the, for instance, if you're making a decision for the university, making sure that you have an economics major there, making sure you have an engineering major there, and making sure you have some sort of other science major there?
Oh, yeah. I think that that is equally as important. And, in our presentation, just on the kind of where we see action happening right now, like we said, those aren't exhaustive, and absolutely it is diversity of thought. Even in the recap slide, we kind of talked about that leaders through narrative can create a group bond or a group think, and I absolutely think that it is not just those distinguishing characteristics that we see up front most of the time. It is absolutely also diversity of thought. Even in the Center for Ethical Leadership, we all come from extremely different backgrounds. Like I said, I come from the health field. Andrew, who is on this call, comes from the entrepreneurship and sports and coaching world. Josh comes from being a teacher who has, degrees in education as well as theology. And I think that's one of the reasons that our office is able to really work together well in diversity, because it is more than just diversity of the forefront things. It is diversity of thought.
Yeah, those are good questions, Jacob. I still feel like there is value in recognizing that racial disparity exists. And so I would say that there's value in that. I think if we get into the dominant culture narrative, that without like voicing that, yes, there are disparities that exist in race, then so we can address those issues. But that's not to say that we should then not also have diversity of thought, diversity of ideas. So those, and Jacob, I think we talked about that in class a few years ago as well, like how important it is to have different types of people at the people making those decisions for your leadership team, how crucial that is. We have gone way over on time, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time and say thank you so much for being here. If you have other questions, please feel free, reach out to our office, reach out to Sarah, myself. We would love to talk with you about those things. Again, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to seeing you at the next Leadership Development Series. Sarah, anything else we need to say?
No, I think that's it. Just thank you all so much for being here, and I enjoyed talking to you all today, and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Yeah, hope you have a great day. Thank you.